Hi, everyone, and welcome to our book club favorites event where we'll be discussing Jennifer Weiner's newest novel, The Summer Place. We are joined today by Jennifer, who you also may know from her 19 other best-selling novels, including That Summer, Big Summer, Mrs. Everything. We're also joined by Elena to help lead the book club conversation. Before we get into our discussion, I want to let everyone watching know that 5 lucky winners could win the Summer Trilogy, which includes a hardcover copy of The Summer Place and paperback copies of Big Summer and That Summer, as well as a Summer Place tote bag. To enter for your chance to win, just leave us a comment on the videos today, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible live on screen.
A tote bag. And now onto our book club. Jen, can you tell us a little bit about The Summer Place?
Absolutely. So The Summer Place is the story of 3 generations of a family coming out of this COVID moment, this couple of years that we've all been through, the quarantines, the lockdowns, the viruses, the variants. There's a wedding on the horizon. There's a young woman named Ruby who has gotten engaged to her pandemic boyfriend, Gabe. And as their wedding draws ever closer, everyone in the family has some big secret, some big thing, piece of their history that they're not telling other people. So there's all these secrets, all these layers of deception, and everything is just building to a head as the wedding gets closer. I keep saying that. Sorry.
That sounds amazing. I'm sorry, Elena. Could you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write The Summer Place? Was it the pandemic? Was it, just all of the weddings you've been in?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the pandemic. Like, I did not want to write a pandemic novel and send anybody right back to the depths of what we've all been through. But I didn't want to ignore it either. And it seemed to me that there was a lot of things that the pandemic occasioned in terms of humor, in terms of relationships and families, and the things you learn about your loved ones when you're suddenly together 24/7. I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about the romances that kind of got fast forwarded, like the couples that had just started dating when the lockdowns began and just were like, let's move in together. Let's see where this goes. And I wanted to visit Cape Cod, even if it was only in my imagination. I spent most of the pandemic here in Philadelphia with my family in a city, and I really would have much rather been on the beach, on the dunes, on the bike paths, in the kettle ponds. So it was wanting to talk about what we'd been through. It was about the things that always interest me in terms of families, marriages, parents and children, mothers and daughters. And then it was just longing for Cape Cod.
Wow. Which, brings us sort of to our next question, which is that The Summer Place really feels like a love letter to Cape Cod, a location that you've brought us to before through That Summer and Big Summer. And particularly the way that Ruby grew up with the grandmother, spending summers on the Cape. It just sounds idyllic. Can you talk a little bit more about your ties to the place and your favorite memories there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Connecticut, and Cape Cod was the beach that we went to. And as I mentioned, I live in Philadelphia now. Everybody here goes to the Jersey Shore. It is not the same. So I have been bringing my daughters to Cape Cod since they were born. It's always been one of my favorite places in the world. It's sort of the place that feels the most like summer to me. And I was really lucky in terms of having my mom be able to spend lots of time with my daughters during the summer. My mom was a teacher, so she had her summers off. And then when she retired, she was able to spend months with my daughters doing all of the things that Ruby gets to do with her step grandmother. Kayaking, clamming, walking on the beach, swimming in the ponds, riding bikes on the bike paths, going to the drive-in movie theater, going to Provincetown to look at the drag queens on the street, all of those wonderful things. And, all of the lobster rolls and the ice cream and the cranberries from the cranberry bogs, all of the things I remember as a girl, all of the things that I've done with my daughters and all of the things that my mom got to do with my girls. I wanted to use all of that, and I wanted to remember it. And I just, I think stories are how we remember the people we loved. And my mom died last year on Mother's Day, which respect that timing. But, this book in a lot of ways, it's a love letter to Cape Cod. And it's a love letter to my mom, to her memory.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I do feel like Cape Cod becomes this kind of character in the book where it's so important to how the book unfolds. And it's just it's such a big piece. It couldn't be set anyplace else. But the actual house in this story also feels like a character in that it actually speaks to you.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that and, what it was like writing an objects kind of dialogue?
Well, I highly recommend A Talking House. If there's anyone out there who is an aspiring writer and you're looking for a good writing prompt, like just write a couple pages in the voice of the house where you live, or your apartment, or your van, if you're #van life, and just talk about what your house would have to say to you. Um, I always knew. So all three of these books are set not just in the same part of Cape Cod, but this house shows up in all three books. And I knew that this book was going to close out the trilogy. I knew that it was going to be set in this house as this family gets ready to say goodbye to it. And as soon as I pitched the idea to my editor, Lindsay Sagnet, she's like, "You have to let us hear from the house. You have to write in the house's voice." And I'm like, "I've already done it." It was just this perfect moment of like synchrony. It was great. But I also had read somewhere that the way that sound travels, it's the vibration of some subatomic particles. That's how sound is made. And those vibrations decrease in frequency to the point where we can't hear them anymore, to the point where animals can't hear them anymore, but the vibrations don't ever stop. So in a very real way, every conversation we've ever had in any space, in a room, in a house, that conversation is still happening on a subatomic level. Those vibrations are still going on. So there's something, I mean, people talk about, oh, that house, it holds so many memories, but in a very real way, the spaces we inhabit do end up holding what's happened inside of them. And as soon as I read that, I was just so captivated by that idea, and the idea that like our places can not only remember us, but maybe even have opinions about what we should be doing with our lives.
I love that, that they have kind of this viewpoint. This house has some decided viewpoints, particularly about the upcoming wedding that is going to be happening at the house. And, weddings can be kind of a stressful time, a happy time, a dramatic time. So, as a writer, was that kind of a fun to dive into, to dream up, kind of frames this whole story along with the house?
Yes. So every writer is her own first reader. And my goal is always to write something that's going to keep my interest and to create characters who I'm going to want to spend time with. I knew I was going to write about a family. I knew where my setting was going to be. And I knew I wanted to explore some of the fault lines that the quarantine had exposed. And so I'm thinking like, okay, so like what's going to happen here? And it was really, really obvious. Weddings. And I always think of something my therapist told me after my first wedding, which was a disaster in many, many ways. She said, we all have this wish that people we love are going to show up at these big transitional moments in our lives, graduations, funerals, weddings, births. They're going to show up as the best versions of themselves. That is what we hope. What happens, however, is people show up as the most intense versions of themselves, because that's like what stress and proximity does to people. You might want your father who fights with everybody to just like not do that. You might want your mother who is completely non-confrontational to like stand up for you for once, and you're not going to get it because that is not what happens. And I always think about that. And so it was just a really easy step to like, I'm going to write a wedding. I'm going to make all of these people their most intense, most concentrated versions of themselves. And then I'm just letting them loose on the chessboard and I'm going to see what happens.
I like the use of intense because I feel like I might have guessed that you were going to say like worst versions of themselves. And I think intense is a very nice way to just say it's an amped up version. You get the good and the bad just at an amped up pace. That's very politically correct way to say that.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, you're gonna get the most extreme version, which means the good and the bad, but it's just not going to be what you want. And once you understand that, you can be a little more forgiving and extend a little more grace, I guess, to the people you love.
Yeah, and it prepares you a little bit. As someone who's going through a summer of quite a bit of weddings of friends, I think that's probably good advice to give to someone. Maybe I should hand this book actually to someone as almost an advice book instead of just a work of fiction.
Well, just see what you notice at these weddings. Like, see if it's true. I mean, I believe it, but maybe my therapist was wrong.
No, and I love that. Like, have a little, just, I feel like a lot of this book is have a little more grace for the people in your lives, right? Like,
Yeah.
they each have so much story and history to them that you don't know until you read it, but
and
the rest of their families don't know. And
right. I mean,
having grace for what people are going through, I think, is a great message.
Yes, I agree.
And there's in this novel especially, there's quite a few different parenting relationships, familial relationships, and that always brings complication. So how did you kind of balance all of those different relationships and, showing each one and kind of giving each one a little bit of the spotlight and, finding that balance in them?
I mean, I just sort of, once I had everybody's voice in my head, once I sort of had some understanding of like, okay, this is where this character is coming from. This is what she wants. This is what her journey is going to be. Once I had that part figured out, it just sort of felt very natural as I was plotting the book and as I was outlining it to be like, okay, I understand the journeys now. How do they intersect? How do I sequence them? What happens when? That's always interesting. And a lot of that gets sort of moved around during revisions because, usually there's some character who is very easy for me to write, feels very familiar, probably sounds a little like me. And then there's like the characters who are a little more difficult to slip into their skin. But I don't know that I had particular favorites with The Summer Place. I think I really just like loved all of them and just wanted them to get it together and start communicating a little better with each other.
I think it's interesting too that you can kind of have characters that are easier to slip into. And in some ways, I wonder for you, is it almost more rewarding to write the characters that are harder to slip into because it took a little bit more work? Or is it fun to kind of put yourself on the page in a way?
I like doing both. I mean, there's something very comfortable and familiar about, like, for example, in The Summer Place, you're going to meet a character named Sarah, who's like a middle-aged mom. She is used to her solitude. She enjoys her peace and quiet. And suddenly she's got two little kids who are attending school from their bedrooms virtually. She's got her husband who is home from work and seeing patients virtually. She's got her stepdaughter and her stepdaughter's new boyfriend who have moved back home and are like having lots of really noisy sex up in the attic. And she wants to kill everybody. Like, she is just ready to explode. Her husband is ignoring her. She can't figure out why. He's completely checked out. She doesn't understand it. And her whole life has been upended. And a lot of that was, sort of ripped from the headlines of my own life and the lives of many of my friends and other moms who, and other friends who are writers who suddenly had kids at home underfoot. But there is something that's like extremely rewarding about writing somebody with whom I have nothing in common and just trying to slip into their skin. It's good, I think. I mean, I don't ever want to write the same book over and over again. I don't ever want to write the same kind of characters over and over again. So it's always good to have a little bit of a challenge and give myself a little bit of a push. Oh, wait, can I answer one of these questions? There's a question in the chat. Somebody is asking, and this is important, do we need to read the first 2 summer books before this one? The answer is no, you do not. And my kids explained this to me. They said they're not sequels, but they are in universe, which means that they're all happening in the same fictional space. So if you've read Big Summer and you've read That Summer, you are going to see there's some little Easter eggs I stuck in there. You're going to see different characters reappear, different settings reappear, but there's absolutely, these are all standalones. You do not have to read you don't have to read one before the other. You can jump in anywhere.
Another great audience question that came in kind of off of that is, this isn't, as you said, it's not exactly a trilogy, but you did kind of write them in concert in the same universe.
Yeah.
Do you like doing that? Was that something that you set out to do? Do you think you'll do it again?
I'm not really, I don't know. I never want to say never. I mean, with this, like, the challenge I set for myself was, after all of these years of hearing my books called beach reads and not really knowing what it meant and sort of thinking it was sort of dismissive and sexist, I decided, like, okay, if this is what they're going to call my books, then I am going to lean into it. I'm going to steer into the skid. I'm going to decide for myself what are the parts of a beach, what makes a book a beach read. Is it a seaside setting? Is it sort of family drama? Is it romance? Like, what are the pieces that I most vibe with? And then how do I use them in a way that satisfies me? And so, like, I knew that there were going to be 3 books with summer in their title. I knew I was going to set them all on Cape Cod. At this point, I'm sort of feeling like I'm ready for another season. I don't know, though. I'm not sure I'm going to write 3 fall books or 3 winter books next, but I'm really happy with the way these all turned out. I think they're all very different stories, but I think that they're all, I think if you're familiar with my work and you read a couple of pages of any one of these, you're like, oh yeah, that's a Jennifer Weiner novel. Like, I think there's the voice and the humor and the women at the center of all 3 of these books, I think, are hopefully going to feel like good company for anybody who's looking for a book to take to the beach or the pool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the thing about those beach reads, is that it's such a wide title to kind of put on something where, they can be really intense, they can be really literary, but it just has like a feeling of it. You want to throw it in your beach bag, and that's kind of hard to explain. I love the way that you kind of explained how you decided to write these and why. It feels like almost like you took on a little bit of a challenge, which I love. Maybe like a winter read, we'll do like a skiing chalet next week.
Oh my gosh. I used to love skiing, and now I'm old and like terrified that I'm going to like break my leg, and then somebody else is going to have to, drive all the carpools, and like the world will fall apart. So yeah.
I would love to know now actually what you're reading, and now that you're in the middle of your book tour, or you're towards the end, are you reading right now? Do you have the time to read?
Oh my gosh. So I'm just like gasping my way toward the finish line. And I'm actually, I'm doing some rereading, which is something that I really love to do. I have books that I go back to that are sort of like my comfort reads. And I've gone back again to the beginning of the Outlander series, Diana Gabaldon's. They're so immersive in terms of this world that she creates and all of the people and the history. And I've been doing some rereading, and I've just been trying to like keep up with all of the new publications, because a lot of times when you're out on book tour, or, somebody will ask you like, hey, what are your top 5 beach reads, or what are you reading now? And I'm looking forward to French Braid, and Tyler's new book. That's been on my my TBR list for a while. It's sort of finally at the top of the pile, so I'm going to get to dive into that one soon.
That sounds amazing.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind, I just want to go back a second, kind of talking about your process. You did kind of mention that while these are in concert, and the way you were kind of thinking about how you were writing these and why. And I'm just wondering if that was really different for you from your past novels, or if this was kind of the way that you were thinking about writing in general before as well?
In terms of like setting out to write like specifically a summer kind of book?
Yeah, like did you think about them kind of in those veins, or were there a story that came to you, or was it a character that maybe came to you?
It's interesting. I think with Big Summer, which was the book that started the summer trilogy, I wanted to write about online culture and social media and the culture of influencers and what that was doing to young women. Like, I have daughters, I have two teenage daughters. So obviously this is something that's like near and dear to my heart, deeply on my mind. I think that I had Daphne's voice in my head pretty early on. So that book began with a character, this young woman named Daphne, who is like a micro influencer is I think what you would call her. She is like a plus size kind of outfit of the day and yoga and workouts and all that kind of stuff. And she's thinking a lot about what it means to curate an online identity and how that's the same and how it's different from who you really are. And then she's navigating this toxic friendship, and then she goes to Cape Cod, and then she meets this guy. So with her, it was the character. With that summer, which in my head, it's still the working title of that book was The Two Dianas. That started with an idea. Like, for a long time, and still to this day, I get emails that are meant for a different Jennifer Weiner. Like, there must be somebody whose email address is like a punctuation mark away from mine. And this happens. And for years, I just sort of like had in the back of my mind, like, I'm going to use this someday because this is such a great way for two characters to meet each other, right? And of course, if they've got the same email addresses, they probably have very similar names. So they can be, in a way, they can be like mirrors of each other. Like, each woman can be looking at the other one and sort of thinking about, how is she the same as I am? How is she different? What choices did she make? What is her life like? What is my life like? So I had this idea of, this kind of meet cute. And then I was thinking about Me Too, and I was thinking about women navigating the world and everything that happens, from the completely mundane to the absolute worst thing you can imagine. And that's what I wanted to write about. And so I had these two women, and they've both got these like very different experiences of being female in the world. So I guess that was sort of, the thing that started that book was these two women with one email address. And then with The Summer Place, so the Two Dianas, which became That Summer, that was like, it was a heavy, serious, lots going on, hard to get my arms around, hard to decide how it should end. And with The Summer Place, I just said, like, I want light, I want fun, I want romantic, I want to close out this trilogy on like this joyful, farcical kind of people coming in and out of rooms and doors slamming and misunderstandings and all that stuff. And then I think I started writing that book. And what always happens with me is, like, no matter how light and fluffy and comedic I'm trying to write, like, something serious always ends up happening. And so in this case, it's like, it's all of those things. It's comic, and it's sexy, and it's bright, and it's frothy, and it's fun, but there's also this kind of undertone of death and loss and grief and the passage of time. So it ended up being a little bit bittersweet. So I would say Big Summer started with a person, That Summer started with an idea, and The Summer Place started with a mood.
I love that you kind of went over the full swath of it. So you covered it all with the trilogy.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear you say it, because you can track back in your mind to the reading experience and say, oh yeah, I can see each of those three things in each of those three books. Like that, especially The Summer Place, the mood is there. Where
yeah, exactly.
It's joy, but it's also the bittersweet in joy. It's really totally encapsulates what you were feeling while you were writing.
Yes, you can feel my yearning for, fun and light and bright, because Big Summer was written before COVID, and it came out like 6 weeks after the lockdowns began, when like nobody knew what was happening and nobody knew how long it was going to last. I see somebody's asking about the covers, and I would love to talk about those for a minute. Somebody says, I love all the covers, bright, fun, and easily relatable. Did you have input? Okay, so here is my cover story. Like, I have been for years, like, wanting fuller figured women on my covers. And it's been a really uphill battle, because, I think that readers got used to a certain look, retailers got used to a certain look. I mean, for like 15 years, every book like mine had a woman on the cover who was like thin and beautiful, and you'd see her from the back, from the shoulders down. Like, so many covers. It's funny when you go back and look at all of them. And then when Mrs. Everything, my 2019 novel, came out, there was a change in direction, and we went, instead of with photographs, we now have illustrated covers, and the women were actually fuller figured and more realistic looking. And God, was I happy. I mean, like, it's the celebrating that went on in my house. And I think readers responded to that cover. I know certainly I was like, hey, can we keep this going? It's so wonderful. Like, this representation is really important. Like, walking into a bookstore and seeing on a book cover somebody who looks like you, even if it's a drawing or a cartoon or an illustration or whatever, like, just knowing that you're there and someone sees you, I think is a wonderful feeling. So I also love these covers, and I'm so happy that these are how these books ended up looking.
That's amazing. And I think, honestly, now sometimes I don't think about the covers as much because I'm so focused on trying to not judge a book by its cover. But you're right. I think walking into a bookstore and seeing yourself reflected, whether it's, front of mind or not, it's kind of there in the back of your mind that you are reflected. And there's a wider variety of people out there just being reflected in society. I think this is the last question that we have time for, but one of our audience members is wondering if you read mysteries.
I read so many mysteries. I love Kate Atkinson. I read Ruth Rendell. I read Agatha Christie. Like, I love a good cozy. I'm less great with like the police procedural kind of things, but yes, I love mysteries. I love like a well plotted mystery, because I'm lucky. I can still just read like a reader, where I'm just in it for my own enjoyment, and I'm not like trying to kind of pry under the hood and see how they did it. But if I finish a mystery that I really like, I will go back and reread and like, okay, how did they do that? Like, where are the breadcrumbs? Where are the clues? What's the red herring? What did I miss? I definitely, I read pretty much every genre you could name, including horror and YA and like just all of it. Like, if it's a good book, I will read it.
And I do think to some extent, like in your novels, there is a piece of mystery that gets put into that. There are red herrings. There are, things that are supposed to jog you in one direction, and then the big surprise at the end to some extent. And that's, I think it probably is what makes your book so amazing, is that you can take from all these different genres and kind of add it back in.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I think we need to start wrapping things up. But before we go, I just want to give one last reminder that you can still post a question in the comment section to be entered to win our Summer Play sweepstakes. Our next book club favorites pick will be Berkeley Foster's On Gin Lane, and you can join our Facebook group or follow us on Instagram to get the latest updates. And finally, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
You're
following Jen on TikTok. Oops, sorry, I cut you off. Instagram and Twitter, and stay tuned for more information on her summer tour. Thank you. And I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This was lots of fun.
Thanks, Jennifer.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.